The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Rose's small apartment, casting long shadows across her tiny living room. At 78 years old, Rose had developed a routine that rarely changed. Every day at exactly 7 in the morning, she would shuffle to her old upright piano, the same one she had owned for nearly 40 years. Her fingers, now twisted with arthritis and marked with age spots, would find their way to the familiar keys. The piano was out of tune, some keys stuck, and the wood had faded to a dull brown. But to Rose, it was still the most beautiful instrument in the world. She would play for an hour each morning, letting the music fill her small space above Chun's bakery in the heart of the city's old neighborhood. The apartment building was nothing fancy. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, and the heating barely worked in winter. But Rose had called it home for the past 15 years, ever since her husband passed away and she could no longer afford their house in the suburbs. The rent was cheap, and Mr. Chun, who owned the bakery downstairs, was kind enough to let her pay a little late. Some months when her pension didn't stretch far enough, but not everyone appreciated Rose's morning concerts. In the apartment next door lived Kelly, a 28-year-old marketing executive who worked for a big tech company downtown. Kelly had moved in 2 years ago, paying double what Rose paid for a slightly bigger apartment with a view of the street instead of the alley. Every morning, Kelly would be woken up by the sound of classical music drifting through the walls. At first, she thought it was charming in an old-fashioned way. But after months of being woken up at 7 sharp, Kelly began to see it differently. She worked late nights, often not getting home until midnight, and she treasured her sleep. "That old lady is at it again," Kelly would mutter to herself, pulling a pillow over her head. She had tried earplugs, but they were uncomfortable. She had tried talking to Rose about it once, but the elderly woman had seemed confused, and kept talking about how music was good for the soul. Kelly wasn't the only one who had opinions about Rose's playing. The young couple in the apartment above, Tony and Lisa, often complained to each other about the weird old music that echoed through the building. They preferred modern pop and couldn't understand why anyone would want to listen to classical pieces from centuries ago. "She plays the same sad songs every day," Lisa would say while getting ready for work. "It's so depressing. Why can't she listen to something upbeat?" The building's other residents had mixed feelings. Mrs. Patterson, who was 72 and lived on the first floor, actually enjoyed Rose's playing. She would sometimes sit by her window with her morning coffee, listening to the melodies drift down from above. But she was outnumbered by the younger residents who saw Rose's music as an outdated annoyance. Rose, however, had no idea how her neighbors felt. She lived in her own world, surrounded by memories and music. Her apartment was filled with old photographs, sheet music, and books about composers. On her mantel sat a picture of her late husband, George, who had always encouraged her to play. Next to it was a faded photo of her from 40 years ago, standing next to a grand piano in what looked like a concert hall. She had stopped performing publicly after George died. The joy had gone out of it somehow, and she felt too old to start over. But in her small apartment with her old piano, she could still feel connected to the music that had shaped her entire life. One particularly frustrating morning, Kelly was running late for an important presentation at work. She had barely slept the night before, working on her pitch, and Rose's piano had woken her up just as she was finally falling into a deep sleep. As she rushed to get ready, the classical music seemed louder than usual, and Kelly reached her breaking point. "That's it," she said to herself, grabbing her phone. "I'm going to do something about this once and for all." Kelly had been watching a late-night comedy show called City Nights the evening before. The host, Rick Martinez, was known for his sarcastic humor and his segments featuring unusual local characters. Just last week, he had featured a man who collected vintage lunchboxes and a woman who taught her cat to paint. The show was always looking for quirky people to feature, and Kelly had an idea. She opened her laptop and found the show's website. There was a section called "Tell Us About Your Weird Neighbors," where viewers could submit stories about interesting people in their communities. Kelly started typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard as her frustration poured out. "I have A neighbor who thinks she's some kind of classical music star, Kelly wrote. She's probably in her 70s or 80s, and every single morning at 7 a.m., she plays this ancient piano that sounds like it belongs in a museum. She plays these really old, boring songs that go on forever. I think she believes she's performing for Carnegie Hall or something, but she's just in a tiny apartment above a bakery. It's actually kind of funny in a sad way. She gets so serious about it like she's some famous pianist, but it's just noise to the rest of us. I bet your viewers would get a kick out of seeing her perform her morning concerts. Kelly hesitated for a moment before hitting send. She wasn't trying to be mean, she told herself. She just wanted the noise to stop, and maybe if Rose saw herself on TV, she would realize how silly she looked and tone it down a bit. 3 days later, Kelly's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, she was surprised to hear that it was someone from City Nights. "Hi, this is Jamie from the City Nights show," the voice said. "We got your submission about your piano-playing neighbor, and we think she sounds perfect for our Hidden Talent segment. We'd love to invite her on the show. Do you think you could help us get in touch with her?" Kelly felt a flutter of excitement mixed with a tiny bit of guilt. "Oh, wow, really? Yeah, I mean, I could probably talk to her. What exactly would you want her to do?" "Well, we'd have her play something on our studio piano," Jamie explained. "It's all very lighthearted and fun. We celebrate people who have unusual hobbies or talents. Rick would interview her a bit, maybe ask about her favorite songs, and then she'd play something for our audience. It's a really popular segment, and people love seeing everyday folks share their passions." After hanging up, Kelly knocked on Rose's door. The older woman answered, wearing a faded floral dress and a surprised expression. "Oh, hello, dear," Rose said. "Is everything all right?" "Actually, I have some really exciting news," Kelly said, forcing a smile. "I know you love playing piano, and I happened to mention it to some people I know in television. There's this show called City Nights, and they want to invite you to come play on their program. Isn't that amazing?" Rose's eyes widened. "Television? Oh my, I don't know about that. I'm not really a performer anymore." "But you are," Kelly insisted. "You play every morning, and you're clearly passionate about it. This could be your chance to share your talent with lots of people. They said they really want to feature you." Rose looked uncertain, but Kelly could see a spark of something in her eyes. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps a long-buried dream of performing again. "Well," Rose said slowly, "I suppose it couldn't hurt to think about it." 2 weeks later, Rose found herself standing outside the glass doors of Channel 7's television studio, clutching her worn brown purse with both hands. She had spent the entire morning getting ready, choosing her best dress from the back of her closet. It was navy blue with small white flowers, something she had worn to church functions years ago when George was still alive. The dress was a bit loose on her now. Rose had lost weight over the past few years, partly from not eating enough when money was tight, and partly from the loneliness that seemed to take away her appetite. But she had pressed it carefully and even found her old pearl necklace to wear with it. She wanted to look respectable, even though she still wasn't entirely sure why they wanted her on television. Kelly had been so enthusiastic about the whole thing, stopping by Rose's apartment almost every day to talk about how exciting it would be. "You'll be famous," Kelly had said with a big smile. "Everyone will see how talented you are." Rose wasn't sure about being famous, but the idea of playing piano for people again stirred something inside her that had been sleeping for a long time. She hadn't performed for an audience in over 10 years. Not since the small concert she had given at the community center for George's birthday. Just a few months before he passed away, a young man with a clipboard and a headset approached her. At the studio entrance, "Are you Rose?" "I'm Danny, one of the production assistants. We're so excited to have you here today." Rose nodded, feeling her heart beat a little faster. "Yes, that's me. I'm a bit nervous, I have to admit." "Don't worry at all," Danny said, leading her through the lobby. "Rick is really looking forward to meeting you. He loves featuring people with special talents. You're going to do great." The studio was much bigger than Rose had imagined. There were cameras everywhere, bright lights hanging from the ceiling, and people rushing around with important looks on their faces. Rose felt very small in the middle of it all. They took her to a small room with a mirror and told her to wait while they got everything ready. Rose sat in the uncomfortable chair and stared at her reflection. Her gray hair was neatly combed, but she noticed how the bright lights made all the wrinkles on her face look deeper. Her hands looked so old with their spotted skin and swollen knuckles. She wondered if she was making a mistake. A woman with bright red lipstick came in and started putting makeup on Rose's face. "We just need to touch you up a bit for the cameras," she said, brushing powder on Rose's cheeks. "The lights wash everyone out." Rose had never worn much makeup, even when she was younger. She felt strange with all the powder and lipstick, like she was wearing a costume. But the makeup woman seemed to know what she was doing, so Rose sat still and let her work. "So you're our piano lady," the woman said while working. "That's so sweet. My grandmother used to play piano too. She taught me chopsticks when I was little." Rose smiled at the memory this brought up. "I taught that song to hundreds of children. Over the years, it's usually the first song they learn." "Oh, you're a teacher?" the woman asked, surprised. "That's wonderful. I bet you have some great stories." Before Rose could answer, someone knocked on the door. "5 minutes." A voice called out. Rose's stomach fluttered with nerves. She hadn't felt this anxious since her first recital when she was 16 years old. Back then, her teacher had told her to imagine the audience in their underwear to calm her nerves. Rose almost smiled at the memory, but she was too nervous to find anything funny right now. They led her onto the set, and Rose was amazed by how different it looked from what she saw on TV at home. The bright lights were almost blinding, and she could barely see the audience sitting in the dark beyond the cameras. The set looked like a living room, with comfortable chairs and a coffee table, but everything felt fake and too bright. Rick Martinez was already sitting in one of the chairs, looking through some papers. He was younger than Rose had expected. Maybe in his 30s, with perfectly styled hair and a suit that looked expensive. When he saw her, he stood up and walked over with a big smile. "Rose, welcome to City Nights," he said, shaking her hand. "We're so happy to have you here. This is going to be fun." Rose noticed that his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and his handshake was brief and formal. She had taught school for many years and had developed a good sense for reading people. Something about Rick's manner made her feel like he wasn't taking her seriously, but she tried to push the feeling away. "Thank you for having me," Rose said quietly. "I'm still not sure why you wanted me here, but I'm grateful for the opportunity." Rick chuckled. "Well, we heard you're quite the pianist. Our viewers love discovering hidden talents in the community. You never know what amazing people are living right next door, right?" The way he said amazing made Rose feel uncomfortable, like he was making fun of something, but she couldn't quite figure out what. They sat down in the chairs, and Rose noticed how the studio audience was much smaller than it looked on TV. There were maybe 50 people sitting in bleacher-style seats, and most of them looked like they were in their 20s and 30s. She wondered if any of them actually enjoyed classical music. "Okay, everyone, we're going live in 30 seconds, someone called out. Rose's heart started pounding. She had never been on live television before. Rick looked at his papers one more time, then looked up at Rose with that same smile. "Just be yourself, Rose. Answer my questions, and then we'll have you play something for everyone. It's going to be great." The bright lights got even brighter, and Rose heard someone counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2. Suddenly, Rick's whole demeanor changed. His smile became bigger and more animated, and his voice got louder and more energetic. "Welcome back to City Nights, everyone. I'm Rick Martinez, and tonight we have a very special guest. This is Rose, and she's here as part of our Hidden Talents segment. Now, Rose, I understand you're quite the musician. Tell us about yourself." Rose blinked in the bright lights, trying to focus on Rick's face. "Well, I live in a small apartment downtown, and I play piano every morning. I've been playing since I was a child." "That's wonderful," Rick said, his voice full of exaggerated enthusiasm. "And how old are you now, Rose?" "I'm 78. Rose answered, wondering why that mattered. 78. Wow, that's amazing. And you still play every single day? Yes, I do. Music has always been important to me. My late husband used to say that a day without music was like a day without sunshine. Rose noticed some people in the audience chuckling, and she wasn't sure why. Rick's smile got even bigger. That's so sweet. And I bet your neighbors just love your daily concerts, don't they? There was something in his tone that made Rose feel like she was missing a joke. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Well, I hope they don't mind. I try not to play too loud? Oh, I'm sure they don't mind at all, Rick said, and Rose was certain now that he was making fun of her somehow. Now, Rose, we have a beautiful grand piano here in the studio. Would you like to show our audience what you can do? Rose looked over at the piano for the first time. It was gorgeous, much nicer than her old upright at home. The black surface gleamed under the lights, and she could tell just by looking that it was perfectly tuned. Yes, I'd like that very much, she said. Standing up slowly, as she walked toward the piano, Rose heard Rick talking to the audience. Let's see what our neighborhood piano virtuoso can do, shall we? The word virtuoso was said in a way that made Rose's cheeks burn with embarrassment. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't the kind of show she had thought it was. Rose walked slowly toward the grand piano, her legs feeling shaky beneath her. The bright studio lights made everything look surreal, like she was walking through a dream. Behind her, she could hear Rick talking to the audience in that cheerful voice that somehow didn't feel genuine. Now, folks, Rose here has been serenading her neighbors every morning for years. Let's see if she can handle the pressure of our beautiful studio piano, Rick said, and Rose caught the hint of amusement. In his voice, the piano bench was the perfect height, much better than her old wobbly stool at home. Rose sat down and placed her hands on her lap, looking at the pristine black and white keys. This piano was probably worth more than everything she owned put together. She had forgotten how beautiful a well-maintained grand piano could be. For a moment, Rose felt overwhelmed by memories. She remembered the first time she had played a grand piano, when she was 22 and auditioning for the city orchestra. She had been so nervous that day, but the moment her fingers touched the keys, everything else had disappeared. There had been other grand pianos over the years, in concert halls and music schools, each one with its own personality and voice. Take your time, Rose, Rick called out from his chair. Play us something that shows off those skills your neighbors get to hear every morning. Rose heard a few people in the audience snicker, and she felt her cheeks grow warm. She was starting to understand that Kelly might not have recommended her for the reasons she had thought. The realization stung, but Rose had dealt with difficult audiences before. During her teaching years, she had performed at school assemblies, where kids talked and laughed during classical pieces. She had learned to focus on the music itself, not on what other people thought about it. She placed her hands on the keys, and felt the familiar cool smoothness under her fingertips. The keys were perfectly weighted, responding to her touch like they were alive. Rose closed her eyes and thought about what to play. She could play something simple and safe. Maybe Für Elise or Canon in D, pieces that everyone recognized and wouldn't challenge anyone. That would probably be what Rick expected from the cute old lady he thought she was. But something inside Rose rebelled against that idea. Instead, she thought about George and how he used to sit in their living room, reading the newspaper while she practiced. He had always loved it when she played Chopin, especially the more dramatic pieces. That's the real you coming out, he would say. Don't hold back. Rose opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. She could see their faces now, mostly young. People who looked like they were waiting to be entertained. Some were checking their phones, others were whispering to their friends. None of them looked like they expected much from her. I'm going to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Rose announced, her voice carrying clearly through the studio microphone. Rick raised his eyebrows. Wow, that sounds impressive. Is that one of those really long, complicated pieces? It's about 9 minutes, Rose said simply. It tells a story. She heard someone in the audience mutter something about, "This is going to be boring," but Rose ignored it. She positioned her hands over the keys and began. The opening notes were soft and gentle, like a question being asked. Rose's fingers moved with more confidence than they had in years. This piano was so responsive that every tiny movement of her hands created exactly the sound she intended. She had forgotten what it felt like to play an instrument that worked. With her instead of against her, the melody started simple, almost like a lullaby, but Rose knew what was coming. This piece was like a journey, starting in a peaceful place but building to something much more powerful. As she played, she felt the years melting away. Her arthritic hands stopped hurting, her back straightened, and she was no longer a lonely old woman sitting in a TV studio. She was a musician, and the music was flowing through her like electricity. The studio had grown quiet. Rose could sense the change even with her eyes closed. The whispers and shuffling had stopped. Even the camera operators, who had been moving around noisily, seemed to have frozen in place as the piece moved into its first dramatic section. Rose's fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that surprised even her. The melody soared and dipped, telling its wordless story of love and loss, hope and despair. This was music that demanded everything from the performer, and Rose was giving it everything she had. Behind her, Rick had stopped smiling. He was leaning forward in his chair, his mouth slightly open, watching Rose's hands move across the keyboard. He had expected her to play something simple and maybe make a few mistakes that would be endearing and slightly amusing. He had not expected this. The audience was completely silent now. People had put away their phones and were staring at the elderly woman who had just transformed before their eyes. The bored expressions had been replaced by amazement, and some people were leaning forward in their seats, not wanting to miss a single note. Rose reached the section where the melody became darker and more intense. Her whole body moved with the music, swaying slightly as she poured emotion into every phrase. This was the part of the piece that had always reminded her of a storm full of power and drama. Her fingers attacked the keys with controlled violence, creating cascades of sound that filled the studio. The camera operators were scrambling now, trying to capture close-ups of Rose's hands as they moved with impossible grace and speed. One cameraman zoomed in on her face, which had been transformed by the music. The uncertain, nervous expression was gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a master musician. Rick looked around the studio, confused by what was happening. The show was supposed to be light and fun, with maybe a little gentle mockery of the quirky local characters they featured. This was not what he had planned. This was real artistry, and it was making him look foolish for the way he had introduced Rose. As the piece moved through its various sections, Rose's performance only got more impressive. The technical difficulties that would challenge even professional pianists seemed effortless under her weathered hands. She played runs that sounded like water flowing over rocks, chord progressions that built like waves, and melodic lines that sang with heartbreaking beauty. People in the audience were looking at each other with expressions of disbelief. Some were recording with their phones now, but not to make fun of Rose. They were witnessing something special, and they knew it. The piece built toward its climax, and Rose's playing became more and more intense. The studio's grand piano was singing under her touch, producing sounds that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the instrument itself. This was music as it was meant to be played, with complete technical mastery serving an even greater emotional truth. Rose's hands moved in perfect coordination, the left hand providing a foundation of rich, complex harmonies while the right hand soared above with the main melody. The years of practice, the decades of experience, all of it was coming together in this moment. As the piece reached its final, triumphant section, Rose threw herself completely into the music. Her whole body was involved now, her shoulders and arms moving with the rhythm, her feet working the pedals with precision. She was no longer just playing the piano. She was channeling the composer's vision and making it her own. The final notes rang out through the studio, and Rose held her hands above the keys for a moment, letting the sound fade away naturally. Then she lowered her hands to her lap and opened her eyes. The studio was completely silent. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then slowly, someone started clapping. The clapping started slowly, just one person in the back of the studio audience. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding with an energy that Rose had never experienced before. Not even during her performing days decades ago, Rose sat at the piano bench, blinking in the bright lights, trying to process what was happening. The applause grew louder and more enthusiastic. People were cheering now, some wiping tears from their eyes. A woman in the front row was crying openly, her hands pressed to her heart. Rick Martinez sat frozen in his chair, his carefully prepared jokes and condescending remarks forgotten. He had hosted this show for 5 years, and he had never seen the audience react like this to anyone. The applause went on, showing no signs of stopping. "Oh my goodness," Rose whispered to herself, still sitting at the piano. She had dreamed of moments like this when she was younger, imagining what it would feel like to move an audience so deeply. But she had never expected it to happen now, at 78, in a television studio where she thought she was going to be made fun of. The camera operators were scrambling to capture everything. One camera focused on Rose's face, which showed a mixture of surprise, joy, and disbelief. Another camera panned across the audience, showing people who were genuinely moved by what they had just witnessed. The director in the control room was frantically giving instructions through the cameraman's headsets. Keep rolling, he shouted. "This is incredible television." The applause continued for what felt like forever. Rose slowly stood up from the piano bench, her legs still shaky, but now from emotion rather than nerves. She gave a small, modest bow, which only made the audience cheer louder. Rick finally managed to stand up and walk over to Rose. His whole demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the smug, condescending host who had introduced her just minutes before. Now he looked humble, almost embarrassed. "Rose," he said, his voice much quieter and more respectful than before. That was absolutely incredible. I don't think I've ever heard anything like that." Rose smiled, still overwhelmed by the response. "Thank you. It felt good to play a real piano again." "A real piano?" Rick asked, genuinely curious now. "What do you usually play on? I have an old upright at home. It's about 40 years old, and some of the keys stick, but it's all I can afford." Rick looked like he had been slapped. Here was a woman with extraordinary talent, playing on a broken-down piano because she couldn't afford better. He thought about his expensive car in the parking lot, his designer clothes, his comfortable salary, and he felt ashamed of how he had treated her. The audience was finally starting to quiet down, but people were still talking excitedly to each other. Rose could hear fragments of conversations. "Did you know she could play like that? Where did she learn?" "That was better than most concerts I've been to." "Rose," Rick said, still looking stunned, "I have to ask, where did you learn to play like that? That was professional level? That was amazing." Rose's cheeks turned pink. "Well, I used to perform professionally many years ago. I played with the city orchestra for about 15 years, and I gave private concerts and recitals. But that was a long time ago." "You were a professional musician?" Rick asked, and Rose could hear the disbelief in his voice. "Oh yes, I studied at the conservatory when I was young, and I performed all over the region. I also taught piano lessons for 30 years after I stopped performing regularly. I probably taught over 1,000 students during my career." Rick ran his hand through his hair, looking more uncomfortable by the minute. "Rose, I have to be honest with you. When we invited you on the show, we thought you were just a hobbyist, someone who played piano as a pastime. We had no idea you were a trained professional." Rose nodded slowly. "I wondered about that. The way you introduced me, it seemed like you were expecting something different." "We were," Rick admitted, looking genuinely sorry. "And I apologize for that. We clearly didn't do our research, and we underestimated you completely." The audience was listening to this conversation with fascination. This wasn't the usual scripted banter they were used to seeing on talk shows. This was real, honest, and uncomfortable in the best possible way. "Why did you stop performing?" Rick asked gently. Rose's expression grew sad. "My husband George got sick about 10 years ago. I stopped performing to take care of him. After he passed away, I lost my confidence, I suppose. I felt too old to start over, and I didn't have the energy to book concerts and deal with all the business side of performing. So I just played for myself in my little apartment. Every morning, Rick said, understanding dawning on his face. Every morning, Rose confirmed. It's how I start my day. It keeps me connected to George and to the music that's been my whole life. There was a moment of silence in the studio. Then someone in the audience started clapping again, and others joined in. But this time it was different. It wasn't just appreciation for her musical skill. It was respect for her as a person, for her story, for everything she had been through. Rick looked out at the audience, then back at Rose. I think our viewers would love to hear more about your story. Would you be willing to come back on the show sometime? Not as a novelty act, but as the accomplished musician you are. Rose's eyes lit up. I would like that very much. And Rose, Rick said, I want to apologize again for how we introduced you tonight. That was wrong, and it won't happen again. Rose smiled kindly. You didn't know? People often make assumptions about older folks. They think we're just sitting around waiting to die, but we have whole lifetimes of experience and skill. Sometimes we just need the right opportunity to show what we can do. The audience erupted in applause again, and this time Rick joined in enthusiastically. The show was supposed to move on to the next segment, but nobody wanted this moment to end. In the control room, the director was on the phone with the network executives. You need to see this, he was saying. This is going to be all over social media within the hour. We've got something special here. He was right. Even before the show ended, people in the audience were posting videos they had taken on their phones. The clips spread quickly on social media, with captions like elderly woman shocks, TV audience with incredible piano performance, and never judge a book by its cover. Back on the set, Rick was still talking with Rose. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our viewers? Rose thought for a moment. I suppose I'd like to say that it's never too late to pursue your dreams. I thought my performing days were over, but tonight showed me that maybe they don't have to be. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening with such open hearts. Music is meant to be shared, and you've given me the greatest gift by sharing this moment with me. The audience gave her one final standing ovation as the show went to commercial break. But Rose's story was just beginning. In the next few hours, her performance would be seen by millions of people around the world, and her life would never be the same again. Rose woke up the next morning to the sound of her phone ringing. This was unusual because hardly anyone ever called her, especially not at 8 in the morning. She shuffled to the kitchen counter where her old flip phone was charging and saw that she had 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Before she could figure out what was happening, someone knocked on her door. Then another knock came from what sounded like a different direction. Rose looked through her peephole and saw Kelly standing in the hallway, but there were other people behind her that Rose didn't recognize. Rose, it's Kelly! You need to see this. Kelly called through the door, sounding more excited than Rose had ever heard her. Rose opened the door to find Kelly holding her laptop, with tears in her eyes. Rose, you're famous! Look at this. Kelly turned the laptop screen toward Rose, and there was a video of her playing piano from the night before. The number at the bottom of the screen showed over 2 million views, and it was still climbing. 2 million people have watched you play, Kelly said, her voice shaking with emotion. And look at the comments. Rose squinted at the small text scrolling by. Absolutely breathtaking. This made me cry. Never judge someone by their age. She's incredible. I want to hear more. The comments kept coming, hundreds of them, all praising her performance. I don't understand, Rose said, sitting down heavily in her kitchen chair. How did so many people see it so quickly? The show posted it online right after it aired last night, Kelly explained. But then people started sharing it on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. It's everywhere, Rose. You're trending on every social media platform. Kelly's phone buzzed, and she looked at it with wide eyes. The Today Show wants to interview you. So does Good Morning America. And look at this email. It's from Lincoln Center in New York. Rose felt dizzy. Lincoln Center, the famous concert hall? They want to know if you'd be interested in performing there, Kelly read from her phone. Rose, this is huge. Lincoln Center is where the best musicians in the world perform. Over the next few hours, Rose's small apartment became chaos. News reporters knocked on her door, her phone rang constantly, and even Mr. Chun from the bakery. Downstairs came up to tell her that people were gathering outside asking about her. Miss Rose, Mr. Chun said in his kind voice, there are maybe 20 people outside with cameras. They all want to talk to you. Some of them have flowers. Kelly had appointed herself as Rose's unofficial manager, screening calls and emails. You have interview requests from every major news station, she told Rose. And Rose, I need to tell you something. Kelly sat down across from Rose at the small kitchen table. I'm so sorry. When I submitted your story to the show, I wasn't trying to honor your talent. I was frustrated about the morning piano playing, and I thought they would make fun of you, and maybe you'd stop playing so early. Rose reached across the table and patted Kelly's hand. I know, dear. I figured that out last night. You're not angry? Kelly asked, surprised. No, I'm not angry. You gave me the greatest gift without even knowing it. You gave me a chance to share my music with the world again. Sometimes the best things happen for the wrong reasons. Kelly started crying. I feel terrible about it. You've been nothing but kind to me, and I was so selfish. Kelly, look around us, Rose said, gesturing to the chaos of ringing phones and bustling activity. If you hadn't done what you did, none of this would be happening. I'd still be playing from my empty apartment, and all these people would never have heard this music. You helped me find my voice again. The apartment door opened, and Mrs. Patterson from downstairs walked in carrying a plate of cookies. Rose, honey, I hope you don't mind me coming up. But there are reporters asking me about you, and I wanted you to know what I've been telling them. What have you been saying? Rose asked. I've been telling them the truth, Mrs. Patterson said. Firmly, that you're the most talented person in this building, that your music has brightened my mornings for years, and that anyone who didn't recognize your gift before now wasn't paying attention. As the day went on, more neighbors stopped by. Tony and Lisa from upstairs came to apologize for complaining about Rose's playing. We had no idea you were so talented, Lisa said. We're so sorry we didn't appreciate what we were hearing. Even people Rose didn't know personally started visiting. A woman named Beth, who lived 3 blocks away, came by to say that she always heard Rose's playing when she walked past the building, and it had become the soundtrack to her morning jogs. Your music made my neighborhood feel more like home, Beth said. I never knew who was playing, but it always made me smile. Rose was overwhelmed by the kindness. All these years, she had thought she was playing for no one, but it turned out she had been touching people's lives without knowing it. Kelly's phone rang again. Rose, this is incredible. It's a man named David from the Community Arts Center. He wants to organize a concert for you, a real concert with ticket sales and everything. He says all the money would go to you. A concert? Rose asked, her heart skipping a beat. He says they have a beautiful concert hall with a Steinway grand piano. He thinks they could sell 500 tickets easily, maybe more. Rose, you could be performing professionally again. That evening, after the reporters had finally left and the phone calls had slowed down, Rose sat at her old upright piano. She played softly, thinking about everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she had been a lonely old woman playing for an audience of one. Now millions of people around the world knew her name. Kelly knocked and came in. Rose, I have one more surprise for you. Some of your former students saw the video and tracked down the show. They want to organize a reunion concert where you play and they perform pieces you taught them. Rose's eyes filled with tears. My students want to see me again? There are at least 30 of them so far. They're saying you changed their lives, that you taught them to love music. One woman said you were the reason she became a music teacher herself. Rose stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she could see a few people still lingering on the sidewalk, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But more importantly, she could see the neighborhood she had called home for 15 years where she had unknowingly been sharing her gift all along. Kelly, Rose said quietly, I want to do the concert at the Art Center. But I want to do something else too. What's that? I want to start teaching again. Maybe give free lessons to kids who can't afford them. This experience has reminded me that music isn't meant to be kept to yourself. It's meant to be shared, passed on, given away. Kelly smiled. I think that's a beautiful idea. Rose looked back at her old piano, then at Kelly. You know what the best part of all this is? What? I get to keep playing every morning? But now I know that someone, somewhere, is listening, and that makes all the difference in the world. The next morning, Rose sat down at her piano at exactly 7 a.m., just like always. But this time she played with the knowledge that her music mattered, that her life had purpose, and that it's never too late to find your audience. Outside her window, the world was waking up to the sound of her piano, and for the first time in years, Rose felt truly alive.